And I am recording as well.
Good. And then Jeff just asked me, I just want to make sure people are aware of the site, Feldenkrais Training Academy. So I'm going to share my screen for a moment. And on this site, it's about our upcoming training. There's a lot of great information about the training, including the curriculum, what makes this training different. But the thing I want to really point out is for the online talks, there's the upcoming online talks, and then there's a link to past talks. And these have the previous case studies and other talks we've done as part of helping people understand what we're doing with the Feldenkrais Training Academy. So just want you all to be aware of that. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing. I'll also put it in the chat. And then let Jeff talk to us.
All right, so this is a case study about, I've titled it Cheryl the Strong. It's one of the most, for me, I can't talk about this without being choked up. Because in the last talk, I talked about compassion. Was the last talk, Laura? I think it was the last talk. Was it the talk before? But this is a study around the woman who in order, when she did what she did with the public that she worked with, her sense of her work that she'd done with herself gave many other people the chance to be compassionate with themselves. And so I want to lead you into how that took place. This woman, Cheryl, I've known her for quite a while. Her son was and daughter were part of the Waldorf school that my children went to. She was raised in a very conservative fundamentalist Christian sect. And the members of that group, and you can speculate, there are many different sects, different groups. You can think in terms of Amish and Mennonite sect rather than Mormon, so to speak. But the members of that group live a relatively austere life, and their main purpose of their life is to prepare themselves for the afterlife. In other words, they do whatever they can to maintain a particular level of decorum. And this is a woman who ended up in a horrific double bind with this, because as a young woman, she was sexually abused by her priest. And so you can imagine when she's getting the message on one hand, which is to prepare herself for proper decorum and behavior, to live life well, so that one would have a chance to be pure in the afterlife, and she's being pursued by the priest of her church. And this started at a young age and went through many years with her as she was being raised. And the interesting thing, that to take this even a step or two further, is that she ended up marrying the priest's son. And the priest's son, when she eventually became conscious of herself, and so much of this for her was forgotten, deeply and profoundly forgotten. And as she began to remember, now it's not like you completely forget these things, but they go into the background and they drift into the background. She pursued a PhD in ethics, which is an interesting PhD to follow. And at some point in time, she began to really recognize within herself that she was very profoundly wounded, emotionally devastated, and could get no help from her church. The patrons in her church didn't believe it. Her husband wouldn't wouldn't even entertain the conversation about her experience. And certainly there was no recourse to deal directly with the priest that she had, who had abused her. So I met her after she had divorced her husband. And after the divorce of her husband, she had found and met another gentleman, a person I know quite well. And they began to live together. She gained custody of their two children. And it was very, very difficult in the sense that when I met her, she had a particular defensiveness and aloofness. She appeared quite friendly, but in fact, there was a kind of a hard, distant quality to her. And she had been through thousands, not hundreds, thousands of hours of therapy. And at some point in time, it became apparent to her that she wanted to write a book about her experience and to pursue this experience directly in the jaws of her church. So she wrote her book and began to involve herself in some of the groups that have to do with women that are abused by priests. And she became somewhat of a celebrity within those groups because of the book that she'd written. Became relatively well known here in the area. In fact, as a result of her coming to me, a number of people were sent to me who came out of those communities as well. So again, you can ask the question, how do you pursue, how do you start, how do you engage a person who's profoundly defended, who's had thousands of hours of therapy, is working like crazy to be with herself, and yet it's almost impossible in one sense for her to be with the pain and the sense of not being cared for or not being seen by the members of her church, by the priest, by her former husband. Where do you start with lessons like this for a person like this? So let me open the floor for a couple of ideas. How do you begin to work with someone like this? So Lindy, you want to say something? I'll unmute you. Go ahead. I don't hear you. Let me. Nothing? Okay. What happened to John? Okay. Russ, you want to join in? Oh, Lindy doesn't have a mic. Okay. Go ahead, Russ.
Okay, I got a stab in the dark. It's a real out there, but I helped somebody drive once and was unhappy about turning. And I had them sort of remember what it felt like when they were really, really, really happy and try to hold the sensation of that and hold on to that as a proxy for relaxing their ribs and all of that kind of stuff. And since this gal is in a loving relationship with somebody, I'm wondering if the, mind and body not being separate, if there might be some way of anchoring that so that she can get past the wall or defensiveness, since my guess is that she's not like that with her significant other.
Yes and no. I mean, they had a lot of work that they had to do because she didn't know how to be intimate, really intimate. Not in the sense that we would want. This idea of anchoring a former experience is one that goes very, very much along with the lines of some of the hypnotherapeutic processes, or in the Peter Levine's work, somatic experiencing, where you very gradually help a person find a place within themselves that they have a profound sense of comfort, some old image. My favorite image for myself is a particular place on the North Umpqua River. There's a place where the river turns in a particular direction. There's a particular greenness to the water. There's a particular way when I'm in that visual of myself I just deepen into a place of calmness. So that's a very, very well known process, and a successful process for many people. And it's not the way I worked with her, because she'd been through hours of that, hours and hours and hours of that. Yeah. And in these talks, I think we have to look really carefully at what are the benefits of the Feldenkrais method in these kind of situations, because we do have profound and distinct differences and benefits in working with people who have been through these kinds of situations. If you'll recall, some of you who have been here, go ahead, Lindy. Your hand is raised.
You hear me?
Yes.
Okay. What did she come for? Did she say why she was coming to see you?
She originally came because she had a sprained ankle. That was the original reason that she came. And over time, the calmness that she experienced in the lessons began to make it safe for her to actually share with me what had happened to her in her life. But the original injury was a sprained ankle. Yeah. I think that the sprained ankle was convenient. Yeah, I think it conveniently gave her the opportunity to come. I'd given talks at the school. I'd given a few sort of free classes, and so people had been invited. There was a period of time, actually, to go a little bit further with this, where she and her husband were having some difficulties with their own intimacy, and I made a deal with them. And so each of them came individually to me for FI lessons, and then they had to agree to come to 10 ATM lessons together. And so we had a before meeting, and at the end of the ATM lessons, we had an after meeting where we talked about the effect of participating in the individual sessions and then going into the ATM class, coming to the class together, and the way that affected and changed their outlook towards each other. So it was a really, really great experiment that I got to engage with in them with regards to utilizing the Feldenkrais method for them to have a change in the way that they could be with each other and be intimate with each other, without having gone through a therapeutic session, or without having gone through any of the didactic stuff that often happens in any of the other therapeutic sessions. That the sessions, the ATM lessons and the FI lessons in and of themselves held something within them that would take down the walls that would interfere with their ability to communicate with each other. And as far as I know, it's pretty successful, because they've had some pretty neat trips together in the last year and a half. So anyone else? Something else? Some other idea? So again, I'm kind of a one-horse pony in the sense of what I do in Feldenkrais lessons. Not really, because there's a very deep quality in the way that I tend to have people experience themselves. And so I think that it's necessary to look at what Moshe had to say. In the beginning of the second year, he said, I could have done therapy, I could have used math, I could have used any other process, I could have used judo, but I chose to use the awareness and movement process. So what was it that was about the movement process that Moshe was recognized and thought of that would make a difference for people? And the main thing that Moshe said is that the quality with awareness through movement, people can radically change the quality of their experience with just in the most simple way possible. And we do that, we change the quality of experience because by the very nature of the process, we begin to eliminate how violent we are with ourselves. And violence means the way in which we use force to achieve an outcome. The most violent forces are, of course, the earth forces that for thousands of years, tens of thousands of years, mold carbon into diamonds. Those are really, really powerful forces. But we in our condition, in the way that we were conditioned and trained by people, by our parents and by the environment and by the people we were raised with, these are powerful and profound forces too that serve to shape us and to condition us. And in the course of that conditioning process, most of us learned ways to use our will to achieve outcomes. Now, the Feldenkrais method in and of itself is about not achieving anything. Now, outcomes happen, and there's no question that outcomes happen. And it's silly to say that we don't have goals, because we do. If I have a person on my table, I have goals. I have a goal of working with that person in such a way that they find that they turn their attention to themselves and they find a resource that's implicit within them, inherent within them, and they learn to utilize it in a way that's more instructive for them. But for the most part, people utilize a particular rigor to defend themselves. And how do you go under and through and around the way that people are self-protected? This woman, even though she'd been through thousands of hours of therapy, she was still profoundly defended. Now, when we work, and we work in such a way that's nonviolent, we work in such a way that's compassionate, we work in such a way that we touch someone. Feldenkrais was clear. He said, I am the environment in which a person receives a lesson in. That means by the very nature of the way I support myself, the work I've done with myself and my own maturation and my own personal transformation, it's the very environment in which when I touch a person that they're cared for. And oftentimes for the first time in their life, they're cared for in a way that they've never experienced. Even if you would try to think in terms of the care that the mother would give their child, but not necessarily. So the first thing is that they're cared for in such a way that there's no force that's generated to change them. The force of the lesson, and there's force, there's movement. So if I lift someone, there's force, there's effort. It's a question of the distribution of force. But the force that's given is given in the sense of a question. And so the person's attention, that means the prefrontal process, the discreteness that a person experiences, they're invited to listen to themselves. And my job is to touch them in such a way that I help them experience what it is to experience questions. Now, the nature of the question is one that oftentimes leads to a pre-verbal outcome that the person doesn't even know verbally, can't even didactically know the answer, even except for if I direct them. I can ask them, when I make this movement, is this easier or is that easier? Is this heavier or is that heavier? Is this leg warmer or that leg warmer? Which leg do you experience as longer? I can ask them questions that begin to have them tune into and pay attention to their own experience. And when that happens, when a person is in this state, when they're really beginning to pay attention in these very, very discrete ways, the process of paying attention brings about a state of mental quietness. The person moves into a state of emotional composure. They move into a state of calmness, and a kind of a sense of collectedness. And if the lessons are discrete enough, and discrete meaning specific, the attention to the details is clear enough and specific enough, then the person's focus becomes more and more laser focused. Not in the hard sense that we think of like a penetrating stare, but that they themselves, the whole of themselves, comes to rest in the experience more completely. Now, when this happens, the muscular habit, the defenses, all of the self-protective and compensatory processes that the person has used in their lifetime, they simply for the moment fade away. And how do they fade away? They fade away because the attention is of a higher order of business than the maintenance of the historic muscular habit. In other words, they get inhibited. The way that the person maintains their muscular habit is inhibited. It becomes, and so the person actually, when they get up from a lesson like this, they cannot be in the state that they were in before. They simply cannot be in the same place that the story arose from or arises from. Now, this is crucial to our work, because a person, unless they can come to recognize a much more complete sense of themselves, a sense of wholeness within themselves, and can take that more and more clearly into the lived space that they live in, then they're going to return to what protections that they've used that have kept them safe in the past. So we have to work with them in such a way that very gradually they find a safety and a willingness to do something, to act in a way that is not within what has historically been safe for them in the past. That means that they have to be able to, in the case of this woman, she had to be able to go to a meeting and stay quiet with herself. She had to go to a meeting of other women who had been abused and maintain a particular quality within herself. And she had to be able to keep it as she was in the meeting in such a way that when she could come back, she could report when she tended to fade and when she tended to keep it, so that she could begin to become noticing of what it was in the environment that would begin to take her out of her sense of composition or sense of composure. Now, when I gave her lessons, there were times when she would stand up in the lesson like a Joan of Arc. There would come out of her a particular quality of fullness, wholeness, steadfastness, a particular sturdiness that was absolutely compelling. And in my way of working, I have ways of testing that. And it's not horrific. I just simply will ask them to sit and to notice whether they're stable or not, and help them recover no stability, and then help them return to stability when they lose their stability. I help them find what it means to have a sense of wholeness and stability within themselves. And these are things that I teach in training programs, and they're things I teach in my own awareness through movement classes. They come from Aikido and Tai Chi. They're practices that would come from giving lessons in Aikido in Kokyu, which means breath control, which are particular Aikido exercises where one learns to maintain a particular evenness and quality of breath while maintaining a clarity in their posture and your ability to move from place to place. So I have adapted some of these things that I learned in Aikido over the years, and things I learned in Tai Chi over the years, and some of the people that have come into my office over the years. And I've adapted these to ways that I can work with clients so that they begin to have a sense that they can find and lose and find and lose and find and lose this quality of stature that when they leave the session, and I can ask them, are you living in a quality that's closer to the way you would like to live your life? They recognize that the quality is of a value that's different than the value that they had when they came in. and it's certainly different from the value than when they first started having lessons with me. Yeah. So that's what I do. I continue to support that growth, that sense of wholeness and composition. The lessons oftentimes, as I said last time, and have spoken in the past, have to deal with the specificity with which people find support from the ground. Freud took people off their feet for a reason. He took their people off their feet so that their anti-gravity responses would be quiet so that they could free associate. Feldenkrais took the same idea and took people off of their feet in such a way that that when they were to lie on the table, they would open up a whole new set of possibilities because the anti-gravity musculature is not overly engaged. And therefore the person has some freedom, neurological freedom to learn how to be with themselves in a way that they didn't have before they laid down. But so many people have maladapted neurological responses to the ground. The very nature of the way that their feet touch the ground. People have a difficult time, but certainly people in some of our other therapeutic traditions, where they train people with core exercises, core strengthening exercises, and don't look at the habits of the way that people engage themselves in gravity and with the ground, and think that in some way that doing exercises in a state-specific way will make a difference to the way a person stands, walks, and supports themselves. In fact, the only thing will happen is that the muscular effort will make them stronger in the areas that they've already know how to strengthen, and it'll lead to compensations that have the potential to work against a person profoundly. And most of the exercises are violent. Violent in the sense that the person uses force against themselves for an outcome. I want to make this point very clear that one of the major tenets of this work is its nonviolence. Even though very few of us in our Feldenkrais world communicate without significant violence, we've had our difficulties over the past. But the fact is that the very tenet of the work is to work with people in such a way that they learn to care for themselves rather than caring for their conditioning. So my lessons with this woman, almost always, especially with the sprained ankle, had to do with something with coming from her feet in many cases. Oftentimes, Feldenkrais practitioners think in terms of looking at where the movement is missing, and they don't look at where the person falls and how the person maintains themselves in gravity in a way that they adapted as a result of the experiences that they've had. My way of looking at lessons is, how can a person find the clearest, purest, most efficient way for them to utilize their skeleton? And so when a person is in that state where they find the clearest and most specific way for them to find support through their skeleton, it means that the tonic muscles, the muscles that are the closest to the joints, the muscles that are engaged, that can engage for long, long periods of time without fatigue, take over the work of supporting us, so that we as human beings are left with the potential in our musculature and in our movement with which to move for our own self-preservation. Most of us are in the state of self-preservation and stability because of our history, so we're compensating and we're falling and we're holding and we're stabilizing and we don't know it. But if we take a person to the place where they find the purest way to support themselves without any particular excessive tone, then that new tone cannot be the tone in which their story exists. And it gives me the chance then to have people walk away from their story. They can walk into, they can walk away, they can walk into, they can walk away. They can begin to turn their attention toward the future based on a tapestry of the past, from which the past becomes resources from them, wisdom for them to continue to move forward in their life. So after a lesson, for example, I'll have a person walk across the floor and I'll have them shrink into the state that they were in before, and notice as soon as the contraction of the state that they were in before, what takes place in a contractual way, the way that they come in, where there's a particular, the way that they stabilize, the way that they hold, the way that they defend, the way that they maintain. And if the lesson has been done well, they can fall into that state and they can walk out of that state. And they can walk out of it and they can recognize that as soon as they find the nicest quality of their skeleton supporting them, there is a dimensional shift. All of a sudden, all the contractive processes, the process, if you watch on the screen, you can see that I'm shrinking. But that's the effect of gravity pulling me. But if I change and I have the sense that I'm being lifted from the ground, all of a sudden my breath and my demeanor and my way of being in myself is radically, radically different. And as soon as the person comes to that shift within themselves, that tonicity, that very simple tone that supports them, means that they really do have a chance to be composed in a way that they don't necessarily know. Now, what does it mean? It means that, interestingly enough, how long can they stop being violent with themselves? This is a huge question. The lesson gives them a few moments in which, if they were in a space capsule, they would have shot out of the rocket and they would have gone out of the orbit. They would have gone into an orbit above the gravitational field that they're used to being pulled into. And let's not forget that everything in our known environment wants to pull us back into the orbit, into the gravitational field that we've known well. We're looking here, when we work with people towards in their own personal transformation, that they can come to a new orbit and then continue to refine their orbit in such a way that the orbit doesn't decay. Now, everybody's orbit decays. It's almost impossible for us to escape the vagaries of our conditioning, the story of our conditioning. But if we can find the route out of it more frequently, as Dennis said, into the state of unadorned worldly engagement on occasion, then all of a sudden we start to have a sense of potential that we begin to move for, that becomes a little bit more free from the historic patterns that we've observed. Now, this woman, are there any questions? Am I making sense at this point? Am I hallucinating? Is there anybody who'd like to ask a question or say something or add to this?
I have a question, Jeff.
Yeah, please.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I was just curious about over what period of time you worked with this woman. And, you know, so often when someone is on the table, some kind of images and memories kind of rise to the surface. And,
right.
You know, if a person becomes really engulfed by those old emotions, do you just kind of stand by? And I mean, I know that like the more you tamp things down, you start to fear that if you let that stuff really kind of, if you really feel it, that it's somehow going to destroy you.
Right.
So you kind of keep a lid on it. So I'm just curious, you know, how you,
dealt
with that if it came up.
Different things certainly appeared. Touching her, there was a particular kind of muscular thickness, kind of rigidity that she maintained in herself. So she kept herself, the lid on pretty effectively. If I'm in another session and emotions do arise, then I think one of the most important things that can happen for us is, when we mature, is to learn that we can be with these emotions without them harming us. It means that, so if I need to, I'll sit for a long period of time with the person as the experience comes, and simply be there and care for them, and provide them Kleenexes and tissues and all of the necessary accoutrements, and I will, if it's appropriate, engage them in a little bit of humor. Yeah, but it's really crucial. Let me just say, I mean, for one of the great advantages of the meditative process is, and I think we actually can be more effective, but the meditative process where one simply learns to be really rigorous and quiet in your mind in the process. When the mind is quiet, the emotions, what you're feeling becomes available. The lessons create the conditions whereby a person becomes attentive to the emotions that are arising within them. And for the most part, in the lessons, the emotions are modulated. They become quiet because of the ability to attend can only take place if the quietness is there. But when the muscular way in which a person has maintained that composition, that sense of defense for so long, and that defense begins to crumble in the lesson, then oftentimes you're correct. The memories will come back and incidences will occur. And oftentimes, if not in the session, in the hours after the session, sometimes you'll have a very cathartic experience, or the memories will come. It's the hardest thing in the world for us as people who are working to mature ourselves, to actually be able to be with the emotions that come up, to stop being blackmailed by them, and to find eventually that we can be with them in such a way that they slowly drain from us. Yeah, they drain from us because our attention isn't in catharsis. Our attention is in having a higher quality in our life. And so when our attention keeps moving towards that quality, these past experiences move further and further away. They just don't grapple with us quite as much. They don't grab us. It's not like I'm being pulled by the terror of my life back into it. I have a chance that I actually can be in an orbit a little bit higher, even though every force within myself wants anything in the environment that reminds me of the circumstance will immediately induce within me the necessity to protect myself. The word for that is called triggered, and I don't particularly like that term because you can't unpull the trigger. You can't unshoot the bullet. So when I'm working with people, and especially in the awareness through movement process, as you know from the last weekend, the awareness through movement process, I'm working with people to really take time in the world between stimulus and response. There's a great Viktor Frankl quote on that. Maybe I can, shall I read it to you?
Yeah.
Okay, give me 1/2 a second. I'll see if I can find it real quickly. It's a beautiful quote, and it's.
You want me to find it, Jeff?
I think I can find it right here, Laura. If you. I'm here. Just needs to open. So I'll read 2 quotes. It says, between stimulus and response, there is a space. One of the great things in our work, between stimulus and response, there is a space. Every single time that we shift between sensation and movement, there's a space. Every time we shift between thinking and feeling, there's a space. Anytime we shift between sensing and feeling, there's a space. Anytime we move between sensing and moving, there's a space. There's a microsecond space because one has to inhibit the other. The excitation of one leads to the inhibition of the other. The whole process of the very nature of the way that we're organized in order to meet the moment is a continual shift between through this moment of stimulus, between stimulus and response. And the Feldenkrais method, when we teach our awareness through movement lessons, gives people the time to widen that space. And when for example, in Portland, I played a lot in the workshop between not this and not that, this between right and left as a basis, so that people could shift back out of right into a space that's not left, and in a space that's not right. So in that moment, you're in a space between. And you could watch yourself go between right and left and watch the moment that you shifted from one to the other. We can get to the place where we have that capacity for ourselves in any of the domains of human behavior. thinking, sensing, feeling, and acting, and the way that that works. So here's the quote: between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. Yeah. In other words, this is a very, very potent place for a person to be, in the place where something is happening in the environment, and one, out of their maturation, can inhibit that which rising, and to be quiet, from a quiet place, seek amongst the resources they have and respond to the moment rather than react. Now, that's something that's acquired. It's not something that's a part of our conditioning. Our conditioning doesn't have within it this variability. Here's the second quote: everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. Yeah. Now, it's very clear that if you're going to have an opportunity to choose your attitudes, yeah, then there has to be that moment of space. Otherwise, it's just pure reaction. And this is, again, very, very dear to the Feldenkrais method, because Moshe said, if you only have one way of doing it, it's compulsion. If you only have two ways of doing it, right and wrong, it's primitive response. He says, not until you have three or more ways in any moment to engage in an activity do you have the ability to choose. Moshe is again pointing to this neurophysiological capacity to be in the space of watching something arise in these microseconds, being able to observe what arises and actually then find out whether it has within it the historic pattern, the historic muscular tension, the historic will, the historic mindful, the way the mind forms itself, and to actually create the space within us to specifically and concretely meet the moment, yeah, with a different set of possibilities, a sense of wisdom. Yeah. So I worked with this woman on and off. She came, it was too much. She had a few sessions, she'd go away. She had a few sessions and she would go away. But once her book was written and she was meeting with these groups, she got invited to a council to make a presentation within her church, in which she was going to meet her antagonists, all the people in her church who didn't believe her, all the elders of the church, all the major people in the church, and she was invited by a small group of people to make a presentation at a conference. Now, I spoke to the fact that she had been sort of like a Joan of Arc. She was living here and she was going to these local meetings. She was counseling people. She was attending other meetings. These things would rise and come up and go down, and she was coming more and more into a sense of wholeness, a sense of being able to be composed in these different, very difficult situations for her, but she was finding it easier. And then the question happened. Here was going to be the biggest stage. Now, this is no different than what Alexander faced when he did his work, when he was doing his work. Alexander, as you know, was a Shakespearean actor, and he lost his voice, and he found that he could stand in front of the mirror and produce his voice. But as soon as he went back to the stage, to the bigger stage, to the place where he had been known for his performance, he went back into the old habit. Yeah. He went back into the place where he engaged and Moshe, as Moshe describes it, he fell back into the pattern, and Moshe said Alexander's greatest ability was to change his intention. That he got to the place where he could step on the stage and suspend the old habit and enter into speaking on the stage with a new intention. Yeah, with an intention that did not include harming his voice as he did Shakespeare. So this woman was presented with a tenfold difficult situation, and she is when she came back into sessions, and she decided that she wanted to have a series of sessions with me before she went to the conference, because she remembered what she could remember how she felt, but she was watching it erode. It was slipping away. It was draining away as she was going to be faced with a situation where there was much older material, much more of a memory, an institutional memory, so to speak. So we started to have sessions, and it involved her really finding a profound sense that she could support herself. And so, and again, I don't have time to, I wish I could go through the whole series of sessions, but those of you who know me and who have seen my work, you can, for example, you could see the work that I did with the ballerina Dorothy on the YouTube channel. And you can see that I'm asking Dorothy to find a finer and finer ability and a sense of balance within herself. My sessions look like that. No matter with this other woman, my sessions have a sense of looking like that, looking at and finding where within a person these vagaries hide. And so right before she left, she was Joan of Arc. I mean, she had a substantial quality to herself, a warrior quality to herself. And I said to her, if you and when you go into the conference with this quality, everyone in the conference will recognize you, and they'll learn to be compassionate for themselves. They'll learn that compassion for themselves is possible. And so she went and gave her talk. And what people could see with her was her new constitution. They could see the quality within herself and the sense that she could care for herself. And she left people with a sense that if I can do this, then it's possible for you too. That there's some doorway, there's some way, there's some process that you can continue to find your way through with this. In other words, she exemplified what we'd worked with. She got, after the conference, over 50 letters from women at the conference thanking her and saying to her basically, what I saw with you gave me hope for myself. Now, they don't know where to find this, but we as Feldenkrais practitioners, I believe that it's part of our mandate to help people find this and know how to find this. So that's, I believe, part of what we do. It's not just about physical integrity. It's not about doing a few things where a person moves a little better and feels nice. I believe that we're really here to help people find a new orbit, a way of escaping the gravitational field of their own conditioned way of being in gravity and in the world. And I believe the lessons have profound means to help people in those discoveries. I believe it's very easy for us to fall into learning the lessons because they're unique and interesting, as opposed to studying the lessons in such a way, how does it bring about a change in my own internal quality so that I have a more concrete and mature way of meeting the next moment. And I believe that the world's in trouble at this point in time, that there's so much complexity and uncertainty that, I mean, some of the people that come into my office who are business people, they're no longer just frazzled. What they don't realize is that they're terrified. Completely and absolutely terrified, and they don't know it. They can't even imagine that they could be terrified because they've always been successful. Yeah, and yet there's something within them where they know that things are spinning out of control. Now, we have to be able to have a measure within ourselves where that composure continues to grow within us so that we can demonstrate what it is to be healthy in times of complexity, in times of uncertainty, in times of difficulty, and in such a way that we can swim upstream against the tide or against the flow that's coming our way. And I believe that the Feldenkrais method is profoundly suited to help us with that, and to help us engage in that maturation process. So that, I believe, is what, when the right people come to me, I pursue when I'm working with them in my office. You know, it has to be the right people. They have to be in the question. They have to be asking whether they know it or not to enter into the realm of wisdom and to shed something that's been so compelling and so much a part of their life. And they're willing to go through the risk and the inconvenience of experiencing what it is to be outside of the historic patterns and preferences that they've known for so long. So that's my story. I'm sticking to it. It's almost time to stop. I think you guys can get that, obviously, that I intend to teach this in the Feldenkrais Training Academy. I intend to work with practitioners towards this end, that as agents of transformation and working with physical integration, emotional dignity, and with health, and to move the needle a little bit as to how the Feldenkrais world is perceived, Feldenkrais method is perceived in the world. So, any questions, any observations, anything? Rob, you got anything to add to this? I'd love to hear if you have something to say.
Well, I've just been really fundamentally touched and resonating with what you've been saying, and I was looking forward to some ideas on how you were directly working with her.
Yeah.
And I also see that you're wanting also to paint a large picture.
Right, in this point, yes.
This point. And so the actual details may not be so important if the intention is held very clearly in the heart and the mind.
Yeah, I would like to paint the details, and I probably need to take someone like this and get permission, and to actually film a series of lessons or something like that, and so that there would be some kind of story that would evolve in working in a situation like this.
Yeah.
But
yeah, but this has been very special because I've just started a special series with a woman who's had a peculiar kind of brain injury.
yes.
And she's just, she's tried for many years to maintain balance and has had difficulty with balance, constant headaches and so on. And partly I see her over and over again as re-stimulating her nervous system and unable to calm herself sufficiently for her vestibular system to just find ease in being upright.
Right.
You can't even find ease in being lying down. So how could she ever feel ease in being upright?
Right.
And so how can I help her find herself?
Right.
So that's so this has been very special in terms of my thinking towards her.
Some of the more specific details, some of my workshops, and you feel free to call me about that, but the Roots of Internal Strength workshop, for example, it has a lot of that sort of very specific material in it for helping people find those kinds of points of balance within themselves.
Yeah.
Thank you, Rob.
Yeah.
Nice to see you, as always.
Always wonderful to see you.
Thank you. All right. Anyone else have a question or an observation before we close this? I think the greatest gift we have to share is the profound caring for and seeing. Roger Russell, my friend Roger, was around Moshe quite a bit, and spent a lot of time with Moshe in Israel. And he said the main thing I mean, Moshe could be completely involved in something, and as soon as another person came in the room, the thing that was so profound was that Moshe was absolutely honed in, tuned in, and completely curious and interested in that person. Took an interest in that person in a way that they had never experienced someone taking an interest in them before, possibly. Absolutely interested in them. And I think our greatest gift is this very human capacity of caring. And that when that is in our touch and it's in our being and it's in our way of being with the people, in and of itself, that whole process of caring, generates the chance for a person to become compassionate for themselves. And compassion is not so easily generated. But compassion means to accept yourself because you could not and cannot be any different than you are. You couldn't have had any other experiences. You couldn't have interpreted. You couldn't have met the world in any other way than you've met it. And that whole process of finally coming to terms and to find that particular quality of compassion for yourself, that sense of beginning to accept yourself as that beginning point, then begins to open doorways into caring for yourself rather than violent with yourself. Certainly it was the case with me, and there's a lot for me to continue to learn, but that's why I'm here. That's why I get to have this great time of being on the planet. This is my lifetime to have a chance to explore what that means. So it's hard being a being out there just floating around without having really direct, concrete experience of these things. So we're fortunate the universe is so kind to offer us these few moments of agony to work through. All right. Thank you very much. Laura, don't forget to stop the recording.
Thanks.
All right, thank you.